Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the May 18th, 2017 School Board Planning Meeting. If you could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mrs. Benko, could we have roll call, please?
Mr. Rawhauser?
Here.
Mrs. Maley?
Here.
Mrs. Herman?
Here.
Mr. Emig?
Here.
Mr. Eifert?
Here.
Mr. DeLauder? Mr. Deschaux?
Here.
Mr. Cook?
Here.
And Mrs. Britton. 7 members are present.
Okay. First under our agenda is the presentations. Tonight we have folks from Crabtree and RBC joining us tonight to update us on potential building project here. So, gentlemen, come to the mics.
Together? Or, yeah, well, let's go through.
It's a little crowded up there.
Sure.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, thank you. Anxious to be sitting here and update everyone on our progress to date. We've had several meetings with the administration to talk about the planning of the project, and I think tonight what we're going to bring to your attention is a relatively high-level overview of options that we're still exploring to help you come to a decision on the process that we proceed with for project selection. So Scott's going to walk us through a couple of key pieces. Schedule. We were asked to take a look at what a tentative timeline might look like, and I think from what we heard the administration and what we're hearing and seeing in terms of planning the project align pretty nicely. We'll show you the details of that. Then we have this option review and value evaluation. We're going to pretty high level talk about all the possible scenarios and zoom in pretty quickly on some of the questions that we were having before the meeting about feasibility of what we had shown previously, the PlanCom Part A application and so forth, and then really talk about the next step. So where do we go from here, and then answer any questions that you have. Okay? So if there are any questions along the way, please let us know.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about schedule. That's one of the first things we want to do is kind of get a handle and don't get too bogged down with what this shows here, because this is just basically showing that we kind of did our homework of what it takes to put together whatever project you decide on through from the beginning programming process. You can go to the next slide. All the way through to the end with approvals and things like that. So the more detailed schedule we can make available, but this kind of sums it up right here. So as John mentioned, we kind of want to take a step back and now that we're hired, look at a high level. We heard in the interviews and we've heard from the administration that it hasn't been decided what you're doing. So we want to kind of help you, guide you along that process. So you'll see the first kind of stage there is an option analysis. And you'll notice there's a July end date of that, and that was because one of our first questions was, all right, if we're going to put together a schedule, when ideally would you want to be under construction? And the answer from the administration was, well, ideally that would be in beginning of July next year. And so what we did was kind of back into that in order to hit all of our approvals, really, come to a complete solution on whatever it is we design. We backed into basically a July approval date of whatever option you decide to go with. Now, that doesn't mean that that's set in stone. That's just to kind of give you an idea of if you wanted to be start construction in July of next year, then that's when we'd be looking to make a decision. Now, if that decision takes longer or shorter, of course, that schedule will adjust accordingly. One quick note. So we are, over the summer, we are going to still be, as we're looking at these options, we're still going to be doing tasks for the high school project, and that's basically meeting with the staff and principals and programming. I know the administration is working on setting up a steering committee, so we're going to be having meetings with a steering committee that'll have members of the public and students and staff. And possibly board members that will involve in the whole process. So go to the next slide. So like I said before, we want to kind of take a step back and look at what are all the potential options out there. You can go to the next. So first we'll start with the high school options. So as we see it, and if there's other ideas that any of the board members have, please let us know. But as we see it, there's kind of four main options for the high school. Build a new high school on the intermediate school site. And don't focus on the shape of these or anything like this. This is more just graphics, just to get everybody kind of familiar with the options. A new high school on the high school site, renovations and additions to the existing intermediate school, or renovations and additions to the existing high school. And then, of course, since we are looking at this as a holistic approach to solve the district's needs, you go to the next slide. We want to look at the intermediate school options as well. And so depending on where the high school goes, you can go to the next slide. You know, the intermediate school will either have, in the long run, additions and renovations to the existing intermediate school, or renovations and additions to the high school. And we've heard kind of along the way that some of the master planning goals, you're looking to solve some of your elementary needs. And so both of those options look at what would happen if, in the long run, if you brought sixth grade up to the intermediate school. So when you take those scenarios, you actually get 6 total options. And I'll go into each one of these in detail. So we just label them A through F. Go to the next slide. We can actually eliminate A and B right away. It's basically infeasible to have 2 schools on the same site. They just wouldn't fit the traffic, impervious area. There's a multitude of reasons. So we wanted to at least lay everything out there to say it was looked at, but obviously these 2 are not viable options. So C and D look at the 2 new high school options. Of course, if you do a new high school on the high school site, then the existing intermediate school remains, and long-term needs would be additions and renovations to that school. Or if you put the high school on the intermediate school site, then the intermediate school can move into the high school. If you go to the next slide, I want to talk about a few key points of that. By moving, and the second option there, by moving the high school to the intermediate school and the intermediate school to the high school does have the capacity to handle not only the current 7 and 8, but should you decide to move 6 to the intermediate school, the high school does have the capacity to handle all 3 grades. So that is one benefit to that option. And then, of course, if you kept the high school on the high school site, then the intermediate school would require renovations and additions. Not only, as you know, you have portables out there, so you need renovations and additions to just handle the 7th and 8th grade, not to mention if you were to look to bring 6th grade up there. And I'm just kind of throwing out just some high-level facts. You'll see as we get towards the latter part of the presentation, the end goal here is to kind of define what the district's goals and needs are, and then to evaluate each one of these options further.
One of the key things with that first point is by moving the intermediate school to the high school and pulling, if you choose to pull the 6th grade, that, we're looking at cost implications across the district for all the buildings. And the obvious thing that particular move allows you to do is it provides space at all of the elementary schools really at no cost, because there's so much space in the existing high school. You've got 4 grades in there now, so clearly 3 could fit. And we understand the sensitivity to grade alignments and how that aligns with your educational vision, but it's unusual for an option to be able to solve that at all the elementary buildings and not trigger construction. The opposite of that scenario would be, you're looking at additions to your elementary schools to serve some of the capacity issues. So that's a unique characteristic of that particular option. By repurposing that high school, you would be able to utilize it in such a way that you'd free up space at all the other buildings and not incur addition. So that certainly seemed like a pretty significant advantage.
Okay, and then the E and F options are essentially the 2 renovation options, depending on if the high school and intermediate schools stay in their current buildings or if they flip sites. Just a couple quick points on that. If you go to the next slide. So option E, where they both stay in their current current school, obviously you would need, for your long-term need, additions and renovations to both the high school and the intermediate school. And then option F, if they swap sites, then the intermediate school would require pretty significant additions and renovations, more so than if they stayed at the high school. The main reason there is because all the core spaces, and when I say core spaces, I mean the auditorium, the gymnasium, the pool, the cafeteria, all those core spaces are undersized. So those are the hard spaces you can't just put an addition on to solve that need. You basically have to build a new auditorium. You can't just, add a few seats on the end. So the scenario where the intermediate school would be used for the high school would require significant additions. Contrary to that, though, if you do, then the intermediate school would be able to fit nicely into the high school without any major additions. So I think one of the goals for this meeting is to look at what options are to be evaluated, and if it's all four, then that's what we can proceed with. But with that evaluation, what we want to do is kind of establish by what criteria. I've kind of put some bullet points here. During the interview process, there wasn't a lot of back and forth for us to kind of establish these needs, so we're kind of getting that now with the administration, but we want to, listen to the board, the public, and the staff, and kind of identify what's important to Dover Area School District, and kind of establish those priorities and list them out. I think Ms. Banco is going to be sending out a poll, if you haven't already, to the board to kind of get everyone's ideas of, obviously, there's some easy ones. How much does each option cost? What's the most cost effective to the district? Another important one is you're at a major crossroads, and a lot of people are, of education's moving into the 21st century, and how does each option, what is that option's ability to incorporate those 21st century educational needs? So we can evaluate that based on each option. Phasing disruption of students and staff, obviously that's another important one, dealing with safety and whatever path you go down. It's a 2-year construction process, so that's a long time, and consideration needs to be made for how much disruption is going to be to your students and staff. Just overall building organization, whether it be renovation or additions, and then any other needs. So I think what we want to do is establish these evaluation criteria. You can go to the next slide. And then not only that, we need to begin to weight them. What's most important? What's most important? Is it cost? Is it safety? How do we rank these items so that we can begin to get into more in-depth analysis and come back to you hopefully in June with some of these. Looking at these a little bit more in depth, and begin to see which ones kind of rise to the top with based on your needs. And then once we have that criteria, as a score of 1 to 10 as a ranking of first to last, and those are ways we can we've been through this process a lot, and we can help you figure out what's the best way to look at this. You guys did a great job of this through the interview process, but we can certainly help you through the option review. So as I said, I think the next step is, once we get some of those evaluation criteria, is kind of roll up our sleeves and dig into it. Have our meetings with the steering committee, and come back in June with looking at each one of these options in a little more detail, and be able to report back. All right, well, here's the cost difference between them, or here's the impact of one of another on educational program and things like that.
I think something relative back to the earlier slide that Scott talked about, the schedule, and we'll end with this piece that will probably transition well into Ken's presentation, is the timing, the time to allow for this analysis to make sure the board's comfortable with the decision, the direction that it goes. We needed to, if you notice, that didn't extend through the whole schedule. And the purpose of that is, in order to get to a construction period a year from now, we're already thinking about construction costs. Just from the inception of the first of the year, just prior to the end of 2016, we had bid and received bids for the Cumberland Valley School projects. And since those two, it was a brand new middle school and a brand new elementary school, about $80 million in construction. We have seen incremental costs on every project that has bid since December of 2016. So we are seeing an increase in construction costs. So we're thinking about that piece of it, as well as the schedule and the time frame for making some of these decisions, so that you can see there's about a year time frame to go through the design and approval process.
And I'll echo another common concern, similar concern to that is, when we submitted the Part A a year and a half or 2 years ago, your enrollment looked a lot different than what it does today. So not only are construction costs on the rise, but also your enrollment has changed. So that's some of the things you'll be seeing as we move forward with this process is what you were planning, the size of the high school, the Part A submission is probably going to be different than what we're going to be planning it to start construction in a year from now. That'll affect square footage and size.
Okay, pretty quick, but hopefully high level, at least to give you an overview. Are there any questions or comments?
Questions? Okay. Thank you very
for
much.
your time.
Okay.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. It was a year ago in June, that we first gave you some illustrations with respect to potential costs for potential projects. And the process that you've gone through, the good process, the hiring at Crabtree, which is an excellent firm. And so tonight, we're here to talk a little bit about the process for incurring the debt under Pennsylvania law. And that's through the use of parameters resolutions. We've done that on every refunding that we've done. So the information tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the process for that. We're going to review the refunding that we just did. We just had some success on the refunding that we just did. And then field questions just in the same spirit of rising costs with respect to construction cost. When we were here last time, we talked about what the Fed was doing and the potential for rising interest rates. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and see how that impacts potential projects down the road too. Okay? So first slide, Jen. This is the outstanding debt of the district. We always like to start here sort of as a placeholder. So on your screens before you and up there, you can see that we have several issues and very good low interest rates. The 16 bond was the most recent. But when you look at the 13, 15A, 15B, and 16, they were all refundings. The total savings for those was about $1.4 million. So the district has done a very good job. The board's done a very good job in the past of always recognizing and listening to our conversations in terms of where interest rates have been. So we have taken advantage of some very attractive markets and savings that have come down to the taxpayers and to your budget. So that's a very, very good thing. The next slide is in particular was the refunding that we just completed. And you can see that it was very short. And if you remember when we were here, we were talking about, geez, if we can somehow sneak $100,000 out of this or $150,000 out of this refunding, it'd be great to go ahead and try to do it, because it's really a fiscal housekeeping thing. There's only 5 years left on this. So this will be the last time that we do this particular refunding, but we saved $255,000. Again, it's one of those fiscal housekeeping things that I want to thank the board for taking the action, because if you don't do it, eventually this just goes away because it's so short. So, credit to everybody with respect to, what happened there. And then the next slide, and we start to talk a little bit now about how this impacts the potential projects going forward and, potential legislation discussions of property tax reform in Harrisburg. Is what a lot of districts have been doing is anyone who's really considering a project is taking a look at using the parameters resolutions that we have used for every one of our refundings. Remember, we come in and we set forth parameters as to what our savings levels should be, and then we get things filed with the state. We're doing the same thing for new money issues for new construction projects. We just did one the other evening. Crabtree's up at Upper Adams with us. We just did one up at Upper Adams, I think it was 2 nights ago. So a lot of districts who are looking at some, sizable projects, whether it's 30 million, 70 million, whatever the number is going to be, we're looking at incurring the debt. We're not issuing the debt. We're just incurring the debt, just like we did on all the refundings. We're putting it on the books of the state, and then that authorizes you to go ahead and issue bonds for the projects at the time that you want to do that. So if we're talking about construction starting in July of 18, probably sometime in 18, depending on, again, interest rates and that whole discussion, you would be able to probably go out and issue debt. It makes sense. I think it gives us the most flexibility in rising interest rate markets. You're going to be starting this process now with what projects are you going to be doing? How is the high school and the intermediate school going to be impacted? And with respect to the cost of that, it makes sense to have some flexibility by having the debt incurred on the state's books. The only expense to you is the cost of the ad. Okay, you have no legal cost. Okay, they don't charge you anything. You have no cost from us. You have no cost from these guys. The only cost you have is the cost of the ad. And if you're going to do the project, you're going to have the cost of the ad this year or next year. It doesn't really matter. So prudently, with discussions of property tax reform in Harrisburg, we're almost in the same boat as we were in 2006 when Act 1 came about. And if you remember, there were about 200 and some school districts who did this exact same thing, got debt incurred on the books of Pennsylvania, and that enabled them to go ahead and to issue debt regardless of whatever was going to come of Act 1. So we're almost in that same boat now. Okay? Rates have increased about 0.4% since we were here in June. It was actually higher in December this year, but we picked up some. Rates have gone actually lower since December of 2016. The Fed has had 3 increases since December of 15. They had December 15, December of 16, and March of 17, December of 16. And it's sort of up in the air whether they're going to see something in June or maybe in September. But they definitely have given this signal to the markets that rates are going higher, mainly due to economic reasons, and maybe that's why cost of goods or the commodities and maybe construction costs are going higher as well, probably dealing with the same impact of the economy. So we've lost some ground from if the project would have started last year, but we can't predict rates. We have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. Stock market's gotten hit pretty hard the last 2 days because actually rates have rallied. So there is this ebb and flow all the time. But I do think getting yourself postured, ready to do something, to either take advantage of the market, to take advantage of potential tax reform, makes perfect sense since you're going to be doing it anyway, assuming you're going to be doing projects. So, questions for me? Mr. Cook.
In that process, when you posture yourself to be able to do something down the road, you mentioned, when you issue the debt, that's when, you're actually approving it and moving forward with it. Is it at that point that the rates come into play?
Yes.
So there's nothing you can do now to secure a lower rate for next year?
There actually is, if you wanted to get into, and it's not a bad word, into interest rate swaps and things like that. You could lock in rates. For example, Pennsylvania Turnpike just did a multi-$100 million transaction 3 weeks ago. Okay. Daniel Boone School District did it about 8 months ago. So yes, there are ways if you wanted to hedge your position with respect to interest rates. We're happy to show you things like that. You are permitted by law to do that under Act 23. Depending on one's appetite for a derivative type product, it's definitely something we could review. Because we're talking about, the projects, if you remember last June, I think we showed like 50, 60, 70 million, somewhere in that ballpark. And it's probably in that ballpark now, depending on what projects are ultimately decided on and the scope of the projects. But there is things that we could do to at least have a discussion. We just had the same discussion at 2 different schools in the last 10 days. So,
One thing that I would think would be helpful in those discussions would be to quantify what that could look like.
Yep.
You know, at a
It's-
1/4% interest
easy.
or something like that.
that's
that-
exactly what the discussion is. We show you current, and then we show you down 50, up 50, and that's what we talk about.
Thank you.
Yep, we're happy to do that anytime.
Anybody else?
Any questions on this before I maybe go into the next topic of York School of Technology? I was asked to make some comments on that tonight.
That's fine.
Okay? The York County School of Technology has a 2007 bond issue that we're going to refund this summer. It was originally a 2003 issue, and we'll be doing that for savings purposes. And pretty much the norm for technology schools the last 5+ years, because of Act 1, is when they're looking at refundings, to the extent that they have other projects going on, they throw them in at the same time. We just completed one at Lehigh Votech, Lancaster Votech, and Career Institute of Technology up in Easton, where the directive to us was, okay, we're going to do the refunding, we're going to have savings. We need to structure the debt so it doesn't impact what the districts are currently paying. So, if you're paying $1, okay, the School of Technology is looking at doing the refunding and borrowing money up to $12 million, and you're still going to pay $1. But instead of the debt going away in 7 years, it's going to go away in 13 years or 14 years. It's pretty much how technology schools need to borrow money nowadays. The only other way is they're going to come back to all the school districts, just like you are. They're going to issue debt, and they're going to say, okay, we need you to, pay more than $1. We need you to pay $1.25. So it has been a very good tool because of Act 1. It's been a very good tool for School of Technologies when they have refundings and have savings with those refundings to help use those savings to keep the impact the same to the participating school districts as they're currently have been paying since 2003. Okay? So there is going to be a resolution probably before you in June that the School of Technology will ask you to vote affirmatively on, and then action would take place sometime in August, more than likely, for that. Okay? So no budget impact to you that above what you're currently paying. And to the extent that that can't happen, interest rates rise, something else happens, then they go back to the drawing board. Okay? Questions on that process, that type of thing? Great. It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much, and we'll be in touch with administration. Thank you, President.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next under presentations, I believe we have representatives of Dover Youth Football here with us tonight, if you'd like to come to the microphones as well.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for hosting us tonight and allow us to present what we are proposing. My name is Chris Hake. I am the president and co-founder of the Dover Youth Football Association.
I'm Jeremiah Rebelo. I'm the vice president.
And co-founder.
Co-founder.
as well. Basically, what we are trying to do is we are a startup football youth organization. Our main goal was to kick off our regular season in 2018. Community wants it now. Within 1 week of even launching a Facebook page, we had over 300 likes. Within a week and a half, we generated over $3,000 in donations. The community wants us to get on a field as soon as possible. So that being said, we have already entered discussions with the facilities committee, Mr. Nelson, Coach Snellbaker, and Richard Leatherly. concerning the usage of North Salem, right in between the ball diamonds, if that would be a possibility to be used. So we are coming humbly asking if we can get an approval for that facility for pretty much now.
One of the big things we're trying to do is create a true feeder program for the Dover school. We do know there's another option for youth football in the area, and some of the things that have been going on down there have a lot of parents, a lot of people in the community not very happy, to the point where they want to pull their kids, take them elsewhere. We don't want to see that happen. The youth in the area needs to play for Dover, and with Leatherly support and Coach Wayne support and a lot of other people, that's what we're trying to do. So these kids don't go play for Spring Grove or West York, or we even had a lot of parents saying they're going to go to Northern because it's right up to 74 here, Dillsburg. We'd like to keep, our youth in Dover, work with the high school. That way, to better the football program as the years go on. 7th grade, 8th grade, on up to varsity.
While also working closely with the cheerleading program as well. We're not just football, we will have recreational cheer as well.
And Coach Wayne, he's completely on board with it. He's very, very interested. They've tried to do this several years down there and wasn't very well received. So this is, a lot of people are very excited about this. That's why we're here tonight, trying to get the field locked down. No cost to you, everything would be taken care of from us. We just need a place to play.
Can you share a little bit what the youth program would look like what ages are come into play, and is this a year-round type of program, or can you share a little bit about how it works? If you don't mind?
Depending on the league, there's certain leagues that have different criteria for age, but it's usually 5 to 6 year olds up to 12.
12 to 13.
12 to 13, depending on the league. And season usually starts in August.
The season does, but heat acclimation and spring clinics would start about the second week of June. The season's typically over at the latest, the beginning of November.
Depending on playoffs.
Depending on playoffs
championships and stuff like
again.
that.
Yes. Basically, we're looking at 2 leagues right now. One of them is the CFA, which plays predominantly in the northern section of York County, even closer to Harrisburg. And then we have the YCYFA, which is very local. For our goal, we want to be in the CFA because they not only recognize athletic contributions and achievements, they also do it academically. That's a good thing. The kids need to have it. I mean, the local one down here, I don't even think they have an all-star team.
They used to. They got away from it.
They don't have that anymore either.
So then, as part of this youth program, they would be training for playing games and things like that. And I guess my next question would be, is the space that you're asking for, is that suitable, in your opinion, to host games and that sort of thing? Is that what we're looking at here? More than just practice and a place to
Correct.
go. It would be for games and that sort of thing.
It would be Dover Youth Football home field. They practice there. They play games on the weekends. We were out with Mr. Nelson and just to look at the field, see if it was even suitable or could even fit, and plenty of room. It would actually be a great place.
Would the goalposts, things like that, interact with the baseball fields?
The
or
goalpost,
softball?
that's a very good question, especially with the safety concern with twisted ankles and whatnot. What we have to do is you basically have a metal sleeve, I believe it's 3 to 4 feet in height, that gets planted into the ground, cemented around it. Then the goalpost is inserted into it, locked in place. Obviously, after every game, they would be removed, and then we would put a cap back on that pipe hole, and then put some dirt on it, probably put some seed on it, depending on the scheduling. So if we have like 2 weeks in between home games, it'll be able to sprout back up a little bit. That would be the best way to alleviate sports-related injuries, especially if you have kids, in the outfield running after balls like that.
Now, with that being said, are you requiring like a shed of some type out there to store everything, or is that gonna be stored off-site?
We have a couple of different options. One is we were actually donated a trailer
Okay.
about, I believe it was 50 foot.
Yeah, it's true.
So the main concern is to appropriately fit it on that facility without being an obstruction or an eyesore. Now, we also were donated about $800 worth of paint to paint it adequately enough.
So you'd be asking for approval to have that trailer on the property as well as have the football field?
Correct.
You'll take care of lining it?
Yes.
That type of maintenance, okay.
Yes. Mowing if needed. I'm not sure how that works with the grounds facility.
And it won't interfere with any other current sports that the district has or hosts there at North Salem?
No, we talked to Mr. Nelson about that, and that was a concern. And with where our season falls throughout the year, no one's back there at that time, so, which was another good thing.
Even so, if there would be a baseball game during a scheduled practice time for us, the borough has also allowed us to use Ketterman as an emergency practice space.
And Mr. Cobb, do the students at your school play for recess out in that area? Are they allowed?
That would be a question I would have, is would it impact, or could our students use that field?
Mhm.
It's all the way down at the tree line, and if you're looking from the school back, it's as far away as you can go. None of that, it's right next to the, that's kind of the way, I mean, I would understand that, that's where that is.
So it wouldn't interfere with the kids or be a hazard of some type, or they'd mess it up and then football would get upset, kind of thing? Just thinking.
It's going to have to be, the lines will probably have to be painted every other week anyways.
Okay.
That's not a concern.
Just like we do at the other place we were playing it.
Yeah,
We repainted them every week, so.
And then how does that work in terms of liability? So will you have your own insurance
will.
on the kids? Okay.
Right. We have quotes on $2 million and $1 million insurance as of right now. It's just up to the board as to what amount you would like us to go with.
Kind of attendance do you have at games and people coming in? I'm just thinking, you know, do people bring lawn chairs in and watch it that way? Is that sufficient for?
Right. As of right now,
spectators?
we have almost 60 athletes, excuse me, tentatively registered. So if you figure you have the child and we'll say 2 parents or guardians, so that's what 180 kids or 180 in attendance. Yeah, people. Thank you. And then if we have a game, you might be easily looking at doubling that attendance.
Yeah.
People.
Will parking be an issue? Because I know at North Salem, if you have a big event, people end up in the grass all the time, and I could imagine that becoming a problem if it's every single weekend, people parking in the grass.
Well, we would only be having a maximum of 5 home games. And it all depends on how they schedule it. Our first home game might not be until 3 weeks into the season. Then we might have a home game the week after, but then another 2 weeks without a home game.
But I don't see a problem with the parking. There's, seems to be adequate parking up there. Seems to be.
Seems.
I've seen it, parking being an issue. I mean, I guess it would depend on how many spectators you do have come,
Yeah.
but yeah, they do end up in the grass quite a bit. How many spots are in that parking lot? Do you have any idea, Dave, Chris? I mean, it looks like a large area, but when it comes to the parking spaces themselves, there's not that many.
That's about right, what's it, 160, 180?
Yeah,
Oh,
maybe,
okay.
I'll be conservative saying 150, it might be 200, it might be close, but somewhere in the neighborhood.
Okay.
Don't worry, think I have a big count, you can count how many were there. See how
Okay.
many
Any concerns that you have, Dave, you know, that we might not have thought about or
Yeah,
anything like that?
We talked extensively about this. They have to take the one roller coaster out, like we said, at the end of the year. It would have to come out, it would have to be laid over the side, they have to cover the one, because it would be sort of in the left field of the one baseball field. It wouldn't affect the other, it would be left field of the other. So that would be, my only concern is making sure we get that out. And, get it out safely. That's my only concern. Other than that, I don't have any.
And where does something like that get stored? Does that come apart that you can put it in the trailer, or?
Those goalposts can actually be taken apart. And when we were down there with Mr. Nelson, the very back corner, if you guys can picture the field back here, the very back corner, we can clear out. That way we're storing anything that we have back there on the back, actually not on the grass. It will be in the back. We'll clear it out, lay some stone down. That way everything's stored off. No one has to mill around it, anything like that. So, which Mr. Nelson kind of wanted us to do.
So goalposts can be stored off-site as well. I have the ability to do that if need be.
Is the organization set up as like a 501c3
We
at this
are indeed,
point with the
yes.
board of directors, and how many people would be on that board? at
The
this
board, as of right now, we have 7.
7. Okay.
With the possibility of going further, I personally do not want to see it get too large. I would prefer a smaller government, if you would.
One of the only other concerns I would have at this point is, I know you mentioned another organization, in the area providing, the youth football programs. What would be our issue as a district if that other organization came to us and said, you're allowing them to have this space, we want to use the space too, and then we've got 2 youth
have
football
their own
programs
field, though.
wanting to come here?
They do,
What
they,
prevents
it's,
another organization from coming forward
Oh.
to say you created a field?
well, because I
need
know
you to
lacrosse
create
has
another
tried,
field.
Eagle Lacrosse has tried to use the property on North Salem, and the conflict has always been, it's baseball season at the same time as lacrosse season, so that baseball was established there first.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, lacrosse has tried to secure property on Dover, at Dover's grounds, and has been denied. So, yeah, I mean, I get your point. It could become
I
an
would
issue.
just say you guys need to be prepared if any other organization comes forward. If you've done for one, you'll have to do for all,
Right.
no matter who they are.
Well, the thing with that, if there would be another organization that came forward to provide youth sports, football especially, obviously, they would be in either 2 or 3 options of a league. And whatever league we are in, that league would not allow another team to come in. That's pretty much the situation we're facing with the YCYFA. They're basically seeing which organization can field the numbers, because bottom line is they want our money to join the league. And right now, our numbers are about double.
I'm intrigued by the concept, but personally, I'm not ready to make the decision tonight. I've needed to hear some of this, and I would really prefer that our solicitor have an opportunity to weigh in on this, and they're not here, with us tonight. I don't know if you've given anything in writing as far as a proposal at this point to Mr. Nelson or Mr. Cherry or anybody here, but maybe just for my comfort, if we could have something as a written proposal, what you're requesting, that then our solicitor can take a look at it, review it, and provide us with the feedback, how it meets with our policies, things like that. I'd feel more comfortable at that
Absolutely.
point, and then we could make a decision from there.
Would we also be able to get a topical view of the property so we can demonstrate the parking?
I would think Mr. Nelson would probably have some schematics of the
Awesome.
land development there.
That's going to be a concern. That was a slight concern of mine, but it will be a concern. I agree.
Okay.
Any other questions we can address?
Maybe I just want to add in the proposal, if you could include what facilities the cheerleaders would need to utilize, if they're going to be competition cheerleaders, are they going to need to be inside somewhere during the winter time? That would also impose more constraints on our buildings.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, next on our agenda is our first public comment period. This is a 3-minute period for items on or off of tonight's agenda. So if you have anything you'd like to comment on, please come to the microphones and state your name and address for the record. Okay. Next is our board president's communication. We did have an executive session immediately following Tuesday night's meeting. We were discussing the recruitment process for our new superintendent after Mr. Cherry's departure at the end of June. So we did have that session immediately after Tuesday night. We'll get into our committee reports now. The first committee up would be comprehensive planning with Mrs. Maley.
Okay, so we've been working on goal 1, which is the implementation of effective instructional practices across all classrooms in each school, and kind of have gone through that whole checklist and really have been doing all of those things that have been tasked before us with that goal. One of the things that we'll be working on over the summer is to start analyzing the data that will start coming in now that the school year's over, and we'll be really taking a look at that so that we can kind of formulate some ideas based on that data. So that's kind of like the next step in terms of reaching or meeting that first goal. In terms of goal 2, which is establish a district system that fully ensures consistent implementation of standards-aligned curricula across all schools for all students. We have purchased and implemented Journeys and Collections. Mrs. Kroom is organizing a meeting of the elementary representatives to review the implementation and to begin some curriculum writing for the next school year. So positive feedback on that. Then, again, with the Study Island, even though we're moving away from Study Island into the maps, we're going to be using the data from Study Island to help kind of figure out a direction that we need to go in based on the data. And then this is still with goal, sorry. This is still with goal number 2, I believe. Or does that go into goal number 3? PBIS, is that goal 3? Okay, thank you. So PBIS, the Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. The principals will be meeting with Mrs. Kroom on June 1st, and we'll kind of revisit that whole program, and so that we can make sure that there is consistent implementation across the district, kindergarten through 12th grade, so that we can all kind of be on the same page at all buildings with that positive behavior intervention. In terms of homeschool communication, with the Skyward, we did implement that system this year. The feedback for the most part from parents has been positive. I myself can say I get Sky Alerts all the time that keeps me informed, and I can see my kids' grades at any time. I can look at their schedules, know what teacher they have, so if I need them for a doctor appointment or whatever, I can have that right there at my fingertips. Can pay for their lunches when you get those little emails saying they're out of money. So it's been very convenient, I think, for a lot of parents to be able to use that system. I think that there needs to be, based on some feedback, that there needs to be more training for our staff still. They've done a great job of kind of getting it up and running, but some more training is needed for next year so that they can learn even more what Skyward can do for them. And in terms of the customer satisfaction survey that was sent last year, we need to do another one this year. Try to keep doing one possibly yearly. We need to talk about the frequency of how often we want to do that. But it was sent out to all the students 6th through 12th grade. They had the opportunity to do that in school. It was sent to parents, staff, and the community. That was all, advertised for people that they could take that survey online. And we got 800 responses, which we were certainly hoping for more, but it's a start. And we'll go from there and formulate another survey on customer satisfaction, which focuses on academics, communication, climate, and culture within the district. And that is it.
Any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the Curriculum and Professional Development Committee with Mrs. Herman.
Okay, well, first, there will be no curriculum meetings in June, July, or August. We have student teachers coming in the fall. There's 7 coming from York College and 3 from Millersville, and they will be placed in Weigelstown, North Salem, Libe, and the high school. I forget if it was the middle school or not. I can't remember. I can't read my writing. Okay, that's the problem. Okay, the policy for field trip. The only thing that I had requested perhaps be known to administration, I'm not sure if they know this or not, but I know I was asked to go on like 3 different field trips this year because they have trouble getting parents with work schedules and so on. And that was because they were saying they needed to have one parent, one chaperone for every 5 children. Now, Mr. Cherry and I had a conversation about that the other night, and it has changed. So a lot of this is according to, I know some of the places that you take the children for field trips, they really don't want a lot of chaperones because it is so well maintained and the way it's set up and scheduled and everything. So I think that's going, it says in the policy that it's to use some discretion there. So if that could be made known, then maybe some of the faculty and so on would feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that they don't have to have one chaperone for every 5 children. Okay, and the policy for homeschooling, Mrs. Kroom told me that that has, some of the law on that was changed several years ago. I was asking some questions about it, things I didn't know. And she said, we're just getting around to updating policies now, PSBA helping us out with that. So that's kind of, it's pretty much the way it was, but there's some things that had changed in there. So that's everything I have.
Any questions for Mrs. Herman?
Nate,
Yes,
I left out a piece in mine, so if we could.
we can go
revisit-
back.
Yeah, we don't have to do it now, because I know that there's an item on here under curriculum for
Yeah.
voting, but.
We can skip back and then we'll do the vote. So
Okay.
That's fine.
We will not be meeting over the summer, June, July, or August, with the curriculum, or the Comprehensive Planning Committee. We will meet again in September. The summer will be spent just collecting that data and analyzing that data. So while that's being done, we won't really have much to report out until September, and then we will have information to report out. So just want to make a note of that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, as Mrs. Maley mentioned, we do have a voting item that we had added to the agenda today under curriculum and professional development. So I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the graduates for the class of 2017 from Dover Area High School, pending completion of all graduation requirements.
So move.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Questions or discussion?
How many
Hearing-
students is that? Do we know? Just out of curiosity. Quick count those, Jen, come on. Okay, it's not important, we can move on.
Wait till I import it to Excel.
Okay.
It's a nice size list.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Mrs. Benko.
Mr. Cook, can I make the vote for you?
Yes, you may.
And what
Yes.
is your vote?
I apologize. Yes. I'm back now, but I lost myself there for a second.
Mr. Rawhauser, help him with that technology over there, okay? The motion carries.
I couldn't help it. He was playing around, so.
No. Don't make that sound that bad.
All right, next is our Facilities Committee. Mr. Emig, Mr. Rawhauser.
Yes, we started, we had, actually, we had the realtor from Bennett Williams with us tonight, as well as the Dover Youth Football. In attendance tonight, I asked Mr. Seitz if he would just remain for this part in case you would have any questions for him. But the first part was talking about Crawltown. He did mention that schools are very difficult to market. However, we've had a lot of activity involved, such as churches, industrial use, church retreats, antique mall. The only problems that we have on there, of course, the building has asbestos, and according to Mr. Seitz, the boiler is in decent shape. Now, and I did inform him that the board would probably like to lower that price, because the current price is $469,900. If I believe, and Mr. Seitz can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you had said the assessed price was $900,000. Taxes would be what, 25,000?
26.
26,000. So, and of course, like I stated at the last committee report, we have 2 gentlemen going up there mowing. We also have to pay to heat the building in the winter, plus I guess to have some water in there. And any other items, Mr. Nelson, that we need to?
Electric and security.
Electric and security. That's where we are as far. Now, I did ask Mr. Seitz if we would lower what his recommendation would be. He said like 385 to 390,000. So, I guess it's up to the board to decide. Mr. Seitz, you want to add anything else to this?
No, good job. As, we do see a lot of activity. As Mr. Emick has stated, it's a specialty piece of real estate. So there's only certain things that really lend itself to. As Mr. Emick mentioned, religious facilities, alternative schools, and really residential, a conversion. There's been a fair amount of residential conversions of old schools. And we've had them all take a look at it. We do get activity. We just haven't gotten to the next step. We've had people come back 2 or 3 times. Mr. Nelson has done a good job of providing us documentation, drawings that we pass on. But again, there's still activity. We haven't lowered the price or come back and suggested to lower the price because we haven't gotten there from anybody to say, hey, you know, our renovation costs are X, and that puts our financial performance above. I don't like to negotiate with ourselves, you know, but made it very clear too that the district, it's negotiable. So by lowering the price, by getting it under the 400, that might give us an opportunity to go back out to everybody that has shown interest and maybe be able to spur some more development. So.
Question for Mr. Nelson and Mrs. Benko. Do you have an approximate idea as to what it costs us to maintain that building on an annual basis at this point?
I think the last time we looked at it, and this wouldn't include any personnel costs as far as mowing and you know, going up to check things out or whatever it might be, I think it was around $12,000. Am I correct? Like $10,000 to $12,000.
Okay. Now, the drop that you're suggesting in the price, you know, from what was it, 469 to 389?
390, 385.
Okay. That's pretty substantial, you know. Do you feel as though that it's necessary to go that far down, or could we go?
It's a cycle. We could go to like 4.25. The reason I say it's like when you price things $9.99,
Right.
it's a psychological
Having
getting
that
below
4 there.
the 4 number.
Mhm.
But we're up to. I don't like to give your money away, you know. So we're willing to, you know, to market it
Right.
A reduction either way, and maybe it's a 2-tier reduction. Maybe we start at something a little bit higher, and then reassess it in 6 months or whatever.
How does everybody else feel?
Well, we established last month that it was close to 20,000 if you figured everything in, the mowing, the heat, because you've said that heating one year was $10,000. Forget what the electric is, about $200 a month. And so basically we had the best part of $100,000 in that school since we closed it. Have you received any offers?
No.
Or you should work on that end to see what
I would love to do that. And,
That's
and
what
we
we
do.
need to
We,
look at.
well, it doesn't get that far. It really is a number of variables. We had an industrial user that would be more interested if the floor slabs were 6 inches. We've talked to a number of our churches. You know, they're still out there looking and going back to their congregations and their committees to make an offer. Residential has looked at a number of different things. The boiler cost of heating, you know, breaking it up into, you know, residential apartments seems to be a price point as well too, to doing all the renovations to make the performance. So we are very encouraging of trying to get an offer. We make it very clear that the school district is flexible in providing what they want. We've talked to, there were some questions about zoning. I've talked to Mr. Raymeyer, your solicitor, if the school district would support a use. And I talked to him, and because that group wanted to know if the school district would go to the municipality and maybe lobby. And I said that I think that would be, if we got to that point, that a representative, maybe Dr. Cherry or, the solicitor would call the municipality and offer support. We would do that as well, too.
I think we need to be looking more at these places that respond, ask them to submit an offer.
We have done that.
And you haven't gotten any?
No.
Were they scared of the price, or?
Again, many variables. They didn't say it's the price. It's more of the construction, or getting approval, or looking at the location, because of it being in a rural area.
Well, I know the location isn't good. And I'd like to know why they figure it's worth $900,000, a little bit like my neighbor's house. They used to call it worth $1 million, and the guy ended up buying it for $250,000.
Right, exactly. We do ask the question, and we do try to get feedback, because the more feedback that we get, the more that we can make adjustments if appropriate, or come back to the school district and offer some suggestions.
Okay, well, thank you, and hopefully we can get somebody to make an offer.
Me too.
What's been the flow of recent inquiries? Has it been steady all along, or has it subsided?
It's sporadic, but today we had a showing today. We probably had 3 showings or inquiries in the last 45 to 60 days. 2 churches and an industrial use.
So in your opinion, there's still people inquiring, it's just,
yes.
we just haven't found the right niche yet.
That's
We
true,
haven't
that's
found
right.
the right fit.
That's correct.
Maybe, to me, that might dictate whether or not it's worthwhile to substantially lower the price, if we're still getting
Right.
some traffic. Are you getting a lot of feedback from
No,
people
we're not getting the feedback. Is church knows what they need.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's set up. It has classrooms, it has the cafeteria area, which could be, a sanctuary. It's really, my experience with churches, and I have some experiences with what we deal, is that's a consensus building. And that takes a lot of time, when you have a congregation who's, using, the offerings to support that.
How important in the decision-making would you say that the asbestos issue and, solving that issue is as a deterrent to people,
It's a
taking it to the
variable.
next-
I can't put a number on it. But, we deal with professional abatement companies all the time. We can point them into the appropriate engineers. We have the data. We can put a cost to that. It's more so probably the infrastructure with the boiler system, and setting those things up and dismantling it, and those costs.
Thank you.
My suggestion, as far as I'm speaking now for myself, I'm not speaking for the board, that we should be, when people come, if you can get them to start submitting offers, instead of what the price is, and go from there. But like I said, that's just my comment.
Sure.
And I'm not speaking for the board.
That's fine.
I might be in favor at this point of considering the price reduction, because I think that could send a message to the market that we're interested in making some moves on this. I struggle going way down, but I also don't want to be here next year and the year after and the year after still talking about Crawltown and the expenses associated with maintaining that. I don't want to sink another $100,000 into a building for another 5 years. It sits there vacant, doing nothing. We have much better uses for our money, in this district. So I'm wondering if the board would be interested in considering something like 425, something around that, amount that gets you closer to the 4 range. And then maybe to Mr. Rawhauser's point, somebody sees it at 425 and they'll say, well, we'll give you 395. And then I'd be like, sold, take it. But
And
maybe could we
yeah.
do some incremental steps there and, consider working that
I'd
way?
recommend the incremental steps. Again, we can review it every 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, whatever. And again, we are very encouraging that we tell people it's negotiable. Without saying, hey, you can get it for $390 or whatever. Negotiable is the
Right.
district is willing to work with a purchaser.
How do you folks feel about that idea? Should we go with 425? 425? Let's put a new price tag on it.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seitz. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
The other items we talked about was Mr. Nelson gave us the summer project schedule for the summer and also the D10 request for next year. There is one item that we discussed. There's an issue with the driveway at Libe. If you remember, we want to put, to eliminate the cars being parked out on the street. The township came to us and asked if we could divert the traffic around the back of the building. Well, now we have a new issue is the township is asking for a stormwater survey. And they would say that if we would attend a township meeting, it's possible that they would waive that stormwater survey. So that's the issue we have currently with the drive around the back. So, Mr. Nelson, anything else on you want to?
Well, I know I talked with Mr. Cherry this afternoon. He's going to
talk to Laura.
He's going to reach out tomorrow to Laura Oswald, the township manager, and talk to her. And I think if we need to go or end up going to a board, at the township, we probably should be maybe a few board members and our solicitor should go to help us, get through that. I think that would be the wise for us. I did reach out today to the original person that did our wetlands treatment or wetland survey back in 1996. I left a message for him. I did not get a phone call back from him today. So hopefully he'll call me back. If I can get a letter from him saying, well, the current retention pond you have is large enough to handle any water flow that you're going to get off this cabin, then they'll accept that as that. But something from 1996, it's hard to say if he's in the middle of that. It's a long time.
Okay, and two things on the D10 request. Should we continue with the driveway around Libe? Mr. Nelson estimated $15,000. Actual price came in at $14,850. The maintenance for replacement of the dump bed on the 2005 Chevy dump truck, he estimated $7,000. The actual price came in at $13,742.08. Just so you're aware. And there are two items on here for the summer that he's implementing. One is district-wide for a Navigate software, safety software system, and the district FMX operations software. The Navigate system would be $2,100 a year. The FMX is $4,500 a year. And actually, we're saving money by those two softwares. So, and he showed us maybe when we have not much of an agenda on a board meeting coming up, he can show us what the safety software looks like, because it's very interesting. It's very interesting. So, Mr. Rawhauser, you have anything else that I might have forgotten?
No, you pretty well covered. The only comment I'd make is if we need to go to township, I'd be willing to go because I know all the supervisors.
Any other questions? Okay, next we have another voting item that was added to the agenda for tonight. So I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the agreement with Dover Township to share the cost of a traffic study at the Dover Square, Intermediate Avenue, and Harmony Grove Road, Route 74, at an approximate cost of $6,000.
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. Questions or discussions?
Is that 6,000 total, or is that we pay 6 and they pay 6?
We're splitting the cost with the developer, so actually we're saving 6,000 because we'd have to do it in the end anyway.
Because of the building?
Yeah.
So this is strictly being done to, as part of the whole building project to make sure that we can take care of the traffic
Right,
patterns?
yeah, they're taking a look at the developer that's going to be putting in the apartments behind
Okay.
the intermediate school. We have to put in a traffic study, so they want to know if we can split the cost. Well, the township reached out to us to do that.
Okay.
So I have a question. How does that work? Dave, you probably know. Like, I mean, you don't call PennDOT tomorrow and say, come on out and do this, and they do it within a week. Is this like a long process to do a traffic study, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a long process, and we don't actually contract PennDOT, we contact a company that does traffic studies. And you may see sometimes as you're traveling around, you'll see like a little rubber cord going across the road, little box on the side, it's counting cars. You may even get to, especially like the square of Dover, they'll have people sitting there watching who makes a right turn, who makes a left turn, which way are they coming, and they'll count cars actually manually. So basically what the traffic study does is it sees what kind of flow is there now, what size is the road, every road has capacity as dictated by PennDOT, and what the capacity of that road is, what's currently on it, and then they factor in what your one network, which you could potentially add to it. And it's all a big bunch of formulas and counts.
So then they come back and basically tell us what we have to do.
They come back and say what you have to do. When we did a traffic study at Blackstown, we did a traffic study at Dover Elementary when we did construction projects here. And it's very encompassing. In fact, when we did Dover Elementary, the funny thing was that we fought this and thankfully we got out of it. They actually wanted us to put a traffic light at Bull Road. That far away, they thought we needed to put a traffic light at Bull Road and Canal because we were going to increase the traffic. And we went back to them and said, we don't have anybody that goes through that intersection. They turn at the intersection, but they don't go through it. And that's how we sort of want it. But they do accomplish so.
And then if they say, like if they'd say to us, you have to put a light, or that we need a light there. Do we have to pay for that, to put the light? Wow.
Yes, we have to pay for any improvements to the road based on anything we change. Like this building, if you go out front, you notice there's a turn lane out there. If somebody had to paint that turn lane, we had to pay for it. We had to pay for the signage to, the turn sign, the left turn only sign. That's all part of the traffic study. In this case, though, if they come back and say, well, you're going to have to put a traffic light at Canal Road and Intermediate Avenue, that would be a joint between us and the developer and possibly Dover Township, because Dover Township has some interest in this game too, because this road is their bypass around Dover Square, which was actually, I don't want to use the wrong word here, but requested or demanded, I don't know which it was, from PennDOT that they come up with an alternate route around Dover. So that could be argued that they have to help pay for that. So, but my question with that is, once they hit Canal Road, where are they going? How are they getting there? How are they getting across? How are they getting past the football field?
Speaking on that, I talked with, one of the township supervisors talked to me about that, the polls on Tuesday about trying to get an outlet up here at Harmony Grove in 74, because he said, if something happens in the square, where you go. And that's what they're working on. And I seen the owner up there at the Jeep shop, he won as a township supervisor. His name was in the paper today. So I guess he has invested interest in that. And if we go along with this study, maybe we can negotiate with the thing where they want us to put that water study in.
Anybody else? Okay, Mrs. Benko. Motion carries. Mr. Cook, Human and Fiscal Resources.
Yeah, we had a fairly light agenda tonight. We had one item that we talked a little bit in depth about, and that involved the liability insurance quote for next year. Jen was presented with our liability insurance quote and came in with a little bit of a substantial increase there, enough for, in her opinion, you know, challenge or question it. And so at this point in time, our broker is going back to see what maybe a few other options might be, but just to give you a little bit of a synopsis there, our overall picture showed an increase of about $18,000 in total costs, which represents about a little less than 7%, 6.9% increase over last year. Within that, there were some things that went up, some things that went down, some things worked in our favor. The most notable increase, though, was in our workman's comp quote for this next year, and there's a couple things that went into that. The workman's comp part of that insurance package was raised 11%, so that's where the initial rates on that are. We're looking at that a little bit more. Jen's asking, you know, to reevaluate that a little bit. Some of that is, there's a couple different factors that go into that. Some of it's usage that affects your actual rate that you're given, a percentage of payroll, and some of it is because of an increased payroll itself. So whatever that rate is then dictates, you know, what each dollar of payroll contributes to that. So so that's still being worked on. Should have, you know, a resolution to that next month, though, for board approval. The other part of the liability insurance, it was recommended to us that we take a look at our umbrella coverage. Our current umbrella coverage is at $5 million for each potential aspect of our insurance package. Not $5 million necessarily total, but $5 million in, you know, this bucket per se, and then $5 million for that bucket. But many districts have an $8 to $10 million umbrella coverage. So ours being a little bit light there, Jen had asked that we pursue, or you know, she's recommending maybe we increase that a little bit. Her recommendation is to increase it to the $8 million level, which would represent about a $1,530 increase in our premiums. So we talked a little bit about that. That would need board approval as well, you know, as far as our total package is concerned. Just a thought on that, you know, $8 million, raising it $3 million for umbrella coverage there for $1,500 seems like a pretty good investment, and it's really a safety net for us. So that's kind of the gist of it. Anything I missed on that, Jen? No? So that'll be coming back next month, I guess, for our approval. Is that correct? Has to be. Has to be. Okay.
Okay, any questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to Safe and Supportive Schools with Mr. Deschaux.
All right. Unlike Steve, we had 7 policies to go over, so that's why we were late. Sorry. Most of the policies have already gone through heavy talking. They've all been approved by PSBA, the admin, legal. So we are recommending that the board vote on adopting the following policies next month. Policy number 246, wellness. Policy 203.1, the HIV infection. Policy 251, homeless students. Now with that one, we did have one question. Has Ms. Ake looked at that?
Yes, she actually sat in, when we sat as administrators, she sat in a meeting.
Okay, the same with 255, foster care?
Yep.
Okay, then we had nothing with that. And then policy 252, hazing, that one was fine. The 2 policies that we had questions with, policy 209.2, diabetes management. In there, it is designated that the nurse and the superintendent must pick one non-licensed employee in every building to handle any issues that come up with a diabetic child there, and that they have to complete yearly training for that building. Who are the non-licensed.
We'd have to select those individuals.
We haven't
and
done that yet.
No.
Once this is
The
adopted,
policy
that's
just
when we have to.
basically says,
Okay.
yes, you're gonna select someone and you're gonna train them.
Now, is there a way with it just being the nurses and whoever this non-licensed employee is there a way to make sure that when, for like the K through 6 buildings, that the nurse isn't in there, is the other person definitely gonna be in there to handle
We'd make
whatever?
sure that they all got trained, so I think Tracy wrote it down when we actually went through that policy.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that was the only question for that one.
And that's a new policy, I believe, for us.
Yes,
Something
yep.
that we don't have. Yep.
Then the other one is policy 808, it's food service. We just had our inspection for the food department, and currently for the alternate meals, we were only giving 3 items. Now we're required to do 5. Personally, I have an issue with this one part. I'm going to read it to you, and I would love to hear the other board members' opinion on it. Right now, currently, if a regular price student's account goes into a negative for $13.25, K through 6 only, then the student will receive an alternative meal consisting of a cheese sandwich, fruit, vegetables, and milk, and will be charged regular meal price. Me personally, if we're charging them a regular meal price, it almost seems like we're punishing the student that, well, you have to eat this nasty cheese sandwich. I'm sorry, I don't know many kindergarten students that are just gonna tear into a cheese sandwich. You're basically punishing them because their parents aren't paying the bill. So, me personally, I don't like that. If you're charging them normal price, then they should get the regular meal. We also talked about, well, why don't we cut the price for it? But if we cut it and lower the items down to 3 like we were doing, we become non-compliant. So you have to give them the 5 items, and we're charging them full price. So me personally, I want to take out the cheese sandwich and just give them a normal meal, because we're not punishing the student. If you're going to get paid full price, they should have the meal. That's my personal feeling. You guys can say what you want.
My cheese sandwich would end up in the trash, believe me.
Well, and
I'm
there's been a
sorry.
lot in the news actually about
Exactly.
lunch shaming. I mean, that's been a real issue in school districts. Now, I've not really heard about it in ours to that degree as some of the news headlines. But I agree. I mean, I think obviously these kids can't be punished for, we're talking K through 6, for their parents' either inability to pay, lack of responsibility to pay, I mean, whatever the case may be. The students shouldn't be punished if they don't eat. And if they're kids whose accounts are behind, oftentimes they're not going to be eating breakfast either at home.
Right.
And so if they don't have a decent lunch and they throw that cheese sandwich away, they're not going to be able to focus on learning. So it has a huge impact on their abilities to just be a regular student in the classroom if they're not getting a proper meal. So I agree that I don't see what the difference is between giving them that pork patty or whatever it is versus a cheese sandwich if they're still getting everything else and they're being charged the same price. I don't think that that's something we should put our kids through, but.
Are the parents alerted when they go into a negative?
They're alerted through,
Weekly.
yes.
Skyward does a really good job of notifying any account that is $8 and lower. After that, when they actually drop in the data, they'll get a repeat email, text, phone call when it's in the negative also.
Do parents respond?
Sometimes not.
I get those messages because
Okay.
I mean, I'll get, it'll say $5 left in your kid's account, or every now and then I'll get a text from one of my kids, Mom, there's nothing in here. So I quick go online and put money
Mom,
in my
I'm getting a
account.
cheese
I
sandwich
know.
today.
And that's just because I've missed, it's not because an email wasn't sent, but that was because I've missed, like in my mind, I've missed the email. So yeah, the system works great in terms of reminding parents. So it's, again, it's either an inability, life has, gets crazy for some parents, or it's, just a lack of responsibility, or in my case, it's just like slips my mind.
So if they give them the cheese sandwich and the 4 other items, they're being charged a regular price anyway, right?
Correct.
So forget the cheese sandwich, give them the regular meal.
Yeah, this is a real hot topic. This has been a hot topic for a lot of years. And teachers pay for the kids' lunches sometimes because they feel so bad for them. I've done it, we've all done it. I don't know what the answer is, because if you don't do something, the parents don't pay. But yet that child, it's not their fault. And it's embarrassing too. I used to whisper in their ear, make sure you tell mom and dad you need money. I used to feel so terrible. I just heard on the radio the other morning, what was it, Central Dauphin? They have like $91,000 in debt for lunches that weren't paid. So I don't know what the answer is. It's not fair for the kids, but I don't know how you get the parents to pay.
Well, and especially when you throw away that pork barbecue sandwich or whatever the meal is, it gets thrown away at the end of the day. Well, that poor kid could have eaten it. I mean, you're willing to just dump it in the trash. So, and we do throw away food.
Where do we stand financially with accounts that are in the negative, and how many kids would be in what I would call the cheese sandwich situation?
I actually haven't taken a really close look at it. I do, because we're coming up at the end of the year. I will be able to get you those figures because I have to.
Right.
Go ahead, Deb.
One of the things that we did not get to talk about because we ran out of time was I totally agree with show that anything you do on the line will single out that child, and that's what we don't want to do. But as a district and a board, I think we have to decide when that delinquent account becomes bad debt, and we didn't even get to talk about that part.
Yep.
Because in this policy, I think that's what they want us to identify. What are we going to do with that negative account that has gone on for a year and never sent money? So,
We had this conversation yesterday, actually, at our business managers meeting. Everyone seems to be all over the board. Some people are giving out peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, cheese sandwiches. Some people are giving out the regular meal, and just for the exact idea you mentioned, that just give them the regular meal because you're charging them for the regular meal. Some of the problems they're running into with peanut butter and jelly is kids like the peanut butter and jelly. So they're like, okay, well, I'm not going to pay. I'm just going to eat the peanut butter and jelly, and I don't have to pay anything. But the debt still goes up and up and up. I mean, whenever she said $91,000 in debt, like that, it's no joke. There's districts here in York County that have hundreds of thousands of dollars in bad debt. And we struggle as business managers to collect that debt because honestly, the individual accounts might not be that high, so the magistrate really doesn't want the responsibility of doing it. We did talk yesterday about going through collection agencies, but of course that's another cost on the district, and those costs have to be run through the general fund, unfortunately, and not through the cafeteria fund. So we are looking at a couple different options, but unfortunately the policy needs to be passed by June 30th because of regulation. So I think we need to come up with some solution because it does have to be passed, even if we pass it and then revisit it in the future.
How is it stated for the 7th through 12th graders? What do they get if their accounts are not paid or if they're in the negative?
their handbooks and everywhere states that there are no charges at that level. But like I told, we're very lenient here, and when they come from 6th grade into 7th, they're not used to that. They're used to being able to say, oh, I can charge 5 meals before I have to tell mom I need money. So we give them a grace period of at least 30 days to get used to that. Now I have to bring money every day because I'm a 7th grader and an 8th grader.
So what happens to that 10th grader whose parents came upon hard times and that's one of the bills they just didn't pay and they're at negative $20 or whatever, or well, I guess you can't do that because they can't charge it. So what happens if they have 0 and it's lunchtime and they're in line?
Or from a friend.
So if they can't borrow from a friend, they're denied food. Okay. And that, I have a problem with that too, but.
Well, we are meeting next month to finish this one.
I don't know what the solution is. I just have a problem with it.
Well, we could do what the guy in Seattle did. He started a GoFundMe account for the district, and he needed $26,000, and I think it went above that. So people were throwing
lunches.
money. Oh, we could do that, GoFundMe.
Oh.
I don't know what the answer is.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Any other questions? Okay. Miscellaneous, any other comments or observations from our board members tonight? Hearing none, we'll move on to our last public comment period, a 2-minute period for items, again, on or off of the agenda. So if you have anything you'd like to comment on, go to the microphones, please. Okay, future meetings. In the agenda tonight, we are not showing the correct meetings. We had to move the meeting dates due to a lot of scheduling conflicts of board members. So our next board action meeting will be June 13th at 7 p.m. It was originally June 20th, so it is a week earlier. And board committee meetings will then be June 15th at 6 o'clock p.m. with the board planning meeting that same night at 7 p.m. So if there's nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.